2021. Just made it out of there. Looking back, 2021. If you had to describe 2021 in one word, how'd you do it? Maybe don't say it out loud. Really, think about it. I saw this bottle of wine, and the bottle of wine's got the name and then the year underneath. Well, the year was 2021, and the name was just one 4-letter word. I'll let you use your imagination. So we put this out on Instagram, and we asked people, what's one word, 2021, what'd you say? And just about all of them were very negative. There was one that was growth, but really that's a negative and trying to spin it into a positive, right? It was things like uncertain, terrible, miserable, difficult, hard. One person just wrote, 2021. Tough. I asked my wife last night, I was like, what would you say? 2021, one word. She was like, dumpster fire. I was like, is that one word or two? 2021 was rough, right? A lot of things happened, a lot of difficulties, a lot of ups and downs. But here's what I want you to think about. Imagine 2022, this time next year. If someone were to ask you the same exact question 1 year from now, 1 year from now, could you imagine if you stepped back and thought about the year and thought about the ups and downs, because I'm sure there will be some of those, thought about the unexpected events, thought about the difficulties, the unforeseen obstacles, maybe some of the loss, right? Everything that most years bring. But what if you could look at a question like this and say, honestly, in spite of my circumstances, the one word I would use to describe this year is peace. Peace in spite of the difficulty. Peace in spite of the uncertainty. Peace in spite of the unexpected events. Sure, there was hard things. There were things I didn't like. I didn't smile about everything. But throughout all of it, there was this feeling on the inside like things were okay. Right? Think about that. What would that look like? What would that kind of year look like? What would it take to get there? And what would you be willing to do to live a year dominated by peace? Dominated by peace. I think, as we were just thinking about where we're going this year, what are we going to talk about this year? What are our goals going to be? What are we going to focus on? This thing that kept coming up over and over again was this idea of peace. We can't predict what's going to happen. We can't obviously predict the uncertainty and the difficulties, but we can talk about how to find peace through all of it. And personally, I think this is what I need. Personally, I think that this is what our culture needs. I think that this is what our world needs. There is this serious need for peace. And so a lot of what we're doing this year is going to come back to that. Not just peace I'm not going to be afraid or I'm not going to be anxious, but peace. What does peace look like in relationships, right? What does peace look like in a regular daily rhythm? In all these other areas of life, how can we bring it back to this internal feeling of peace? And that's where we're going with a lot of the stuff that we're going to do this year, because really it's something that we need. It's something that we need. So I was just in the airport this past week. My wife and I, we went to Miami, which is horrible being in Miami. No, I'm just kidding. It was great, loved it. But there was a conference. We went with a group called Orchard Group. They're the group that helped us start this church. And so I met with some other people who were starting churches and trying to do the same thing over the past year, and we just cried together. But it was great. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't fun, though? The travel experience, the airport. Have you been to an airport lately? Yeah, it's like the new DMV. Like everyone in there is just really, really stressed and uptight and tense. And it came time for us to get on the plane, to board the plane. They're calling out the groups, and we're in this big line, like at the bottleneck trying to get in, and we're like cattle. And it comes time for our group, and we're there, and all of a sudden, I'm like getting right up to where it's almost my turn to get in the plane. And this lady comes running in. And there's this whole mob of people behind me. She comes running in with two young girls, and she just like jumps in front of us. She's like, excuse me, I gotta go in front of you. I gotta get on this plane. And I'm like, yeah, all right, okay. Like really intense. She's like, my group number's already been called. I'm like, okay. She's just like hot. And then she sits and like she gets to her place in line, and she turns and she looks at her daughter and she goes, I don't want to hear anything out of you. And the daughter's like, okay. And then there's this friend that the daughter has brought, and the mother turns and looks at the friend and goes, where's your mom? And she's like, I think that she might have gone to the bathroom. And the daughter then looks at her friend and goes, oh, she might miss the plane. And the mom looks at the daughter and goes, you need to relax. And just like, and I'm sitting there, standing there, and I'm just like, like, this is getting tense. Like, should I make a joke, I didn't, which I think worked out well. But there was like, the tension was kind of contagious, The stress was I started to feel myself get tight and just be like, all right, I just want to get in this plane so I could trap with this lady for the next 3 hours. But really, think about this. What if we were the kind of people that had a kind of peace that was that kind of contagious, Maybe a flight gets canceled or your plans get derailed, whatever it is, whatever, environment you're in. And you're the one who's just like, okay, peace. And people feed off of that. Could you imagine? And so the question we have to ask is, what is peace? What is peace? Peace is a really hard thing to define. The biblical idea of peace, it comes from this word shalom, the Hebrew word shalom. Maybe you've heard it before. It has this idea of everything being like just right, satisfied, without lack, fulfilled, like, I think about peace, and I think of, you ever open a new jar of peanut butter, and the top, the way it looks, that is peace to me. I don't even want to touch it. I want to just perfectly. Just right. Or like a new box of crayons. Pop it open, they're all sharp in their place, color-coded. Nice, I asked my wife, I was like, what do you think of when you think of peace? She was like, kids in bed. Like, just right. Everything's okay. What's interesting? When you ask people to define peace, and even if you look up peace, it's often defined by what it's not. Right? Like I said, one of the biblical definitions is actually the state of being like without lack, without fear, without violence. In fact, the dictionary definition, and really where we got the idea for this series, or the title for this series, is freedom from disturbance. Like nothing is disturbing you. That's the idea of peace. In a lot of ways, it's defined by what it's not. And so then we have to ask ourselves, like, well, if peace is freedom from disturbance, what that means then is that the way to peace, or you want to say the path to peace, is really more about removal than it is about acquiring or doing something. Or it's about removing the disturbances, the things that disturb the peace, things that disturb your peace. And so another question, right? What disturbs your peace? What messes with your feeling of like just right? For me, it's when I see a parked car with the windshield wipers up. Oh man, like couldn't they just wait one more second? Just let them lay down and go in. It really just gets, I have some I have some issues. Like what? Really though? Really, when I think about it? Okay. Everything is just fine until, like for me, to give you some examples, it's like, let's say I'm in an argument or made a mistake, and I come to this place where I realize there is some fault, right? I realize I have done something wrong. Maybe it's a lot, maybe it's a little bit, but it's like there's something inside of me that actually keeps me from admitting it. Right? Like I know if I admit it, that will bring me to it, but there's something that keeps me from admitting. Or maybe there's somebody in your life, right, who you like, who you care about, and things are going their way. And you're happy, like you want to be happy for them, but you also want what they have. Maybe it was a position, maybe it's a person, maybe it's a thing, and you see them getting it, and you're like, in most situations, I would be happy, but there's something that keeps me from genuinely being able to celebrate these people. Like there's something inside of me that's disturbing my peace. Or maybe you recognize a weakness within yourself. Maybe you're doing something and you're like, I don't have the capability to do that, right? And I need someone to step in. But there's something within me that keeps me from just asking for help, even though that would lead to peace, right? It keeps me from doing things that will protect my peace. It's like there's something within me that causes me to do things that will disrupt my peace. Like when I'm in an argument and the issue is not the issue anymore, right? We've moved on 15 minutes ago from whether or not I took the pails out, and now it's getting like, it's getting not pleasant. It's no longer, but it's like there's something inside that causes me to keep going, even though I know this isn't leading somewhere. Or maybe there's some kind of issue, right? And you know the truth of the situation, but to protect yourself, like the easiest thing to do is just come out and just say, okay, this is how it is, right? This is what I value. I value telling the truth. But there's something that causes me to feel like maybe I shouldn't tell the whole story. It's like there's something within us that keeps us from and causes us to. It keeps us from doing things that will lead us to peace and causes us to do things that actually mess up our peace. It causes us to get offended. It causes us to be sensitive to criticism when maybe somebody has something helpful to say. But it's like there's something inside of me that's stopping me from being able to do that. It causes me to get to be really bothered when one of my other parents at the bus stop tells me about how great things are going for their family, right? Or to feel like, are they trying to put me down? And so like we get defensive, we get offended. It keeps me from and causes us to, and it disrupts our peace. And this is the thing that we're talking about today. And it's not one of those things typically you would think about when you think about disturbing the peace, but it will totally destroy peace, that calm, the satisfaction within us. There's a king who was around hundreds and hundreds of years ago. His name was Solomon. He was the son of David, from like David and Goliath, who became King David. His son Solomon is known as one of the wisest men ever, maybe the wisest man ever at the time. And here's what he wrote. Are you ready? He said, pride comes before destruction. Maybe you've heard this before. And he goes on, he says, and a haughty spirit before a fall. We don't use that word, but it has this idea of being high. He's saying the same thing twice. This was common in ancient wisdom literature. He's saying, you want to destroy your peace, you let pride in. What I love about this so much is he doesn't say pride is wrong, right? He said it leads to destruction. It will ruin things within you. Pride leads to destruction. Pride will disturb your peace. Or we could say, when you let pride in, you push peace out. The two, they just don't work well together. There's not room for both of them. When you let pride in, you push peace out. And so pride, when we talk about pride, there's probably a few things that come to your mind, right? Like there is pride, there is a good kind of pride. And when we're talking about pride in a positive way, really what we're talking about is a deep sense of appreciation, right? Or admiration. Maybe you know what went into something and you've seen the progress they've made. And you're like, I'm so proud of them, right? That's a good thing. That's not what we're talking about. You take that, set that aside. Not what we're talking about. Then there's a pride. Typically, when we think of pride, we think of arrogance, right? People think they're like God's gift to the world, right? They're just better than everybody. And that's part of pride. But it's really just like a small glimpse of the big picture. There's this guy, his name is C.S. Lewis. I think he defines pride better than anybody else. Here's what he says, and this kind of like blew my mind. Here's what he says. He says, pride is ruthless, sleepless, unsmiling concentration on the self. Pride makes everything about me. It's this obsession, this fixation with who I am and what I'm worth. It causes me to see everything in light of myself and what that means about my value, or what it says about my value. And so really this can come in the superiority form of pride, what we typically call arrogance, when people think they're better than everyone else, right? Like, oh, look what I've accomplished, and because I've accomplished this, well, I am worth more than other people, superiority. But it also is on the other side. This is the more subtle side of it. There is an inferiority side of pride, where maybe you fail, or you don't reach a standard you wanted to, but it causes you to see everything in light of who you are and what you're worth. And it could be that makes me great. It could be this makes me horrible. And so we can make ourselves feel really small, or we can make ourselves feel really big, but it is this ruthless, sleepless, like it just won't quit. It's exhausting. And it's concentration on the self. It's like we're in a courtroom. And it's the case for who I am and what I'm worth. And I'm representing myself. So think about it like this. So here's a ladder, right? Pride, make everything about this ladder, of going up or coming down. Everything we do becomes climbing this ladder. And it's like there's this standard, like way up there, right, of enough, right? And your enough might be different than what I call my enough, right? It might be like successful. It might be beautiful. It might be popular. But it's this standard that we're shooting for. And so everything we do, we see in light of that. These like rungs on the ladder, it's anything that makes us feel loved, respected, accepted, valuable. And the issue with this ladder is that every time you take a step up, that standard, like it just goes right up with you. It's an unattainable standard. It's ruthless. It's unsleeping, restless. It's impossible to reach. And so this is what it looks like. Like imagine I play the guitar, which I don't, but imagine I do, right? Like I can't play the guitar. When pride takes hold, I can't do it because I love it. Right? It's like, well, I play the guitar, and that makes me cool, fun, whatever. Okay, well, here, and I'm like shooting for it, right? And then so maybe I go and do a little thing, right? And people like it, and they're like, oh, nice job. I'm like, well, thank you. And then maybe there's one day where I go and it doesn't go as well, and someone's like, oh, you didn't really have something. I say, oh, okay, thank you. Or you should have done it a little bit more like this, right? And it's all right. And you just keep, and it just keeps, but it's everything comes back to this. I see everything then in light of myself. So someone might actually give me some like good criticism, but instead of being like, wow, I can learn from that, I see it in light of, well, how does this make me look, right? And pride is so subtle. It's so subtle. It's so hard to see. It's when like even things we do as parents, if you're a parent, right? Like maybe you do something that you're not proud of. It's amazing because when pride creeps in, the issue becomes more about whether or not you're a good parent than what you did was good for your kids. It makes everything about us. And it's this you will never reach whatever you're going for. It's like an escalator in reverse. You can just keep climbing. And you know this, like maybe there is a job you really wanted. And you're like, once I get there, then I won't have to prove myself anymore. And then you got it. You did. And maybe for like a day, you're like, I'm a little higher than I was before. But what happens? Like you look up and hey, it moved up with you. And now you just got to prove yourself to different people. Right? Or maybe you wanted to make a certain amount of money, or you wanted to graduate, or you wanted to date that person, or get married, or fill in but there's something that's like, oh, well, I'm trying. And you know if you've ever gotten anything you really wanted, you know it doesn't fix the problem. But what it will do is make everything about, am I worth something now? It takes the joy out of everything. Madonna, might have heard of her, right? She sings, in case you don't know that. Here's what she said. I think she captures it perfectly. She says, I have an iron will, and all of my will has always been to conquer some horrible feeling of inadequacy. This is why she's good at what she does, as she's explained. To conquer some feeling, to get to some level where I feel like I'm something. She says, I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being. And then I get to another stage, and I think I'm mediocre and uninteresting. And I find a way to get myself out of that again and again. She says, my drive in life, think about how sad this is. Because my drive in life is from this horrible feeling of being mediocre. And that's always pushing me. Because even though I've become somebody, I still have to prove that somebody. My struggle has never ended, and it probably never will. It makes everything about who I am and what I'm worth. And while you wouldn't look at her and be like, oh, she got a problem with pride. That's really what it is. And it's not wrong. It's destructive. It steals the joy out of everything in life. When you let pride in, you push the peace out. It's exhausting. And so, what do we do? Well, there's a guy named Paul. We've talked about him a lot. He's one of the most influential guys who's ever lived. He started churches all over the known world at the time. And what's cool about him, he wrote a lot of the New Testament, and he actually lets us into the way that he thinks. And he talks a little bit about this. He doesn't actually call it pride, but he talks about it. And here's what he says. His reputation to the church that he's writing to, his reputation is on the line. Who he is on the line. Here's what he says. He says, I care very little if I'm judged by you or any human court. Now, at the time, no one's talking about a courtroom. He's painting a picture here of a courtroom. He's saying, it doesn't matter to me what you have to say or what anybody else has to say about me. In other words, you don't get to say what I'm worth, who I am, and what I'm worth. All right, now you might have heard that before, but then he goes on, this is where it gets a little crazy. He says, indeed, I do not even judge myself. As if to say, and I don't get to say who I am and what I'm worth. He says, my conscience is clear, but that doesn't make me innocent. In other words, he's saying, you know me, you know what I've done, you know where I've come from. He's accomplished a lot of things, but he's saying, even though I have done things, not even that gets to say who I am or what I'm worth. He says, it is the Lord who judges me. Now, maybe you hear that right away and you think about phrases like only God can judge me and whatever. All right, one day I'm going to have to answer to God. That's not what he's talking about in this situation. He's painting a picture of a courtroom with a verdict. He's saying, you don't get to say who I am and what I'm worth. I don't get to say who I am and what I'm worth. What I've done doesn't get to say who I am and what I'm worth. Only God does. And if you know the rest of Paul's writings, or if you've heard us talk about it here before, to him, like what he has explained to us is that that verdict is in and has been delivered, like the case is closed. You determine what something is worth by what someone is willing to pay for it. And what we believe, what we're all about here at the church, the reason that we talk about Jesus so much, the reason you see crosses around the necks of so many Christians is because what we believe was that he was showing us what we're worth to him. The way Paul says it, he says, you were bought with a price. When Jesus went to the cross, he was showing you that you were worth everything for him. And that is the verdict that's in. That is who you are and what you're worth. And so what that allows us to do, really, maybe that seems distant and far out and abstract, but really if you sit and think about that and chew on that and try to understand the implications of that, it allows us to pack up the ladder, right? That standard of enough, what he's saying is it's been reached for you. You don't have to prove that or work for that anymore. You can get out of the courtroom. And it disarms the pride within us. All of a sudden, I don't need to keep arguing when the argument's over, because I don't need to prove myself, right? I can admit that I'm wrong. I don't need to take criticism so personally because it doesn't say anything about who I am and what I'm worth. I can listen and be like, all right, maybe this person's angry, but maybe they have a point here. Maybe there's something I can learn from this. I can genuinely celebrate the good that my friends experience because I don't have to see it in light of myself. There's a pastor, his name's Tim Keller. He describes this like freedom from pride. He describes it as the freedom of self-forgetfulness. You don't have to see the world. Everything you go through and experience and everything people do, it doesn't have to say anything about you. And so you can celebrate other people because it has nothing to do with you. Because your value, that's not on the table. That's a discussion that has ended. It's free. He also says humility. Humility. A lot of people, humility, pride, the opposite. He's true humility. Someone's really humble. If you spend time with someone who's humble, you shouldn't walk away from them being wow, that person's so humble. They just think so low of themselves, right? So if someone's really humble, and experiencing that self-forgetfulness, it's not all about them. It's you walk away from them feeling that person was so genuinely interested in me. It wasn't about them. And so what I'm getting at here, and what I've kind of hinted at, might have even said, when we ask this question, what disturbs your peace? It's pride. Pride disturbs the peace, right? It's not the argument that disturbs my peace. It's the pride that keeps me from ending it when it should be over. It's not the mistake that I made that disturbs my peace. It's the pride that keeps me from admitting it. It's not the fact that I've done something wrong. It's the pride that makes me feel like I have to lie about it now. The thing, and if we can deal with pride, then these things, these disturbances, these events that typically would keep us from and cause us to, they have nothing to grab onto, right? It just becomes, oh yeah, we had a discussion and I didn't realize I did this. I made her feel that way. So yeah, well now I know for next time. Yeah, did you hear about them? They did this. They went on vacation again. And it's so great. No, we can't do that this year, but that's not about us. It's about them. I'm happy for their family. It frees us. And so it no longer keeps us from or causes us to. The question, though, is really like, whose weight, whose word carries the most weight? And how loud is God's voice in your life? Or I should say, like, what are you doing to feed the things that God says about you? Like, how often are you exposing yourself to those things? Because you're going to hear, like, what other people say about you, you're going to hear that every single day. People are going to tell you who you are and what you're worth every single day. And you know what? You're going to tell yourself who you are and what you're worth every single day. And it might not be accurate, right? Like, we can make ourselves feel so small. Those voices, they just don't quiet down. And so this is why we talk about like listening, like reading this stuff for yourself, really getting into it, not just coming once a week, but joining a group or putting yourself in a place. Maybe it's listening to a radio station, but being told over and over again. There's a song we sing here. I'm not going to sing it because I don't want you to like think less of me, right? But it's, I am who you say I am. And in the song it says, who the Son sets free is free indeed. I am who you say I am. I'm a child of God. That's the whole idea here. It doesn't matter what my performance says about me. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't even matter what I say. I can rest in who God says I am. I was talking to my wife, Allie, about this last night. And I was like, how sad would it be if our kids, we have a 7-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy, how sad would it be if they felt like every time they blew it, we were going to kick them out of the family? Like if they felt like they had to work to earn their place here, to call this home. They make a mess, and my daughter comes up to me and she's like, I don't even belong in this family anymore. Look at me. I'm like, what? Like, what you've done? That has nothing to do with whether or not you are my daughter. I get to say what your place in this family is, not you. And even if you don't feel like you belong here, it doesn't change anything. And I think that's how God feels about us. Like we beat ourselves up. We're like, I'm doubting, I'm struggling. I did that thing again. I've been struggling with it for 20 years. You're like, what? And we're like, you know what? I'm a mess. It's not my thing. Right? And I think God looks at us and is like, you don't get to say that. It's not your place. It's not your place. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here, and we'll wrap up. But here's what I want you to think about as we close. Like, just imagine. Just imagine how much more peace you would have if you never felt like you had to defend yourself. How much more peace you would have if you could admit that you're wrong like that. How much more peace you would have if you could celebrate the success of other people. If everything that people said and everything that you experienced wasn't tied to your identity. Just imagine the freedom of self-forgetfulness. C.S. Lewis, the guy who gave us our definition for today, here's what he says. This is how he describes it, and here's where we'll close. He says, we must not think pride is something that God forbids because he's offended at it. Or that humility is something he demands as due to his own dignity, as if God himself was proud. He's not in the least worried about his dignity. The point is, he says, he wants you to know him. He wants to give you himself. He says, if you really get into any kind of touch with him, you will in fact be humble. Delightedly humble. Picture this, he says, delightedly humble, feeling the infinite relief of having for once got rid of all the silly nonsense about your own dignity, which has made you restless and unhappy all your life. He says to get near it, even for a moment, is like a drink of cold water to a man in the desert.